Hello and welcome to Break Check, Rocket League Esports Podcast. Hope you're having a wonderful day. Today, we're going to talk about the North American Regional Number 3 Mobile One Mountain Classic. This was the final regional in the winter split, and it determined the 5 teams that will be representing North America at the major in Los Angeles. So we're just going to jump straight into it and get to talking about some groups, see what's going on there. Groups were, I think, more interesting than normal with North America. Obviously, we have a pretty solidified ladder as far as what teams end up in what places, as opposed to the European region, which sometimes we see quite a bit of shakeup. But like I said, groups was a little bit more wild than normal, I think. So we take a look here at Group A. We got V1 going with a perfect 3-0 performance, not dropping a single game. We got Randoms, which is a team that has only made it into the regional one time. It's a relatively new team, actually taking down NRG. They end up qualifying through group stage into the bracket as a second seed. And then NRG barely makes it in through a tiebreaker game against Shopify Rebellion. And we see that here. NRG does take that series in a 3-1 fashion. And then Rebellion being eliminated, which I think, like I said, is a little bit of a surprise. I don't think many of us anticipated Randoms playing as well as they did. Randoms is a team consisting of Two Piece and Chronic, who are both, if I'm not mistaken, 15 years old, relatively recently 15 years old. So they've been high-level players for quite some time. Chronic has been a 1v1 GOAT for quite some time. And I know Two Piece has played in quite a bit of the weeklies and monthlies, the community tournaments. And then they have their third, who is Knight. And Knight is another player that I think is pretty young. I think he's 16 or 17. I'm not totally sure. But he has made it into a few of the regionals in RLCS X. So 3 young guns, again, relatively new to the pro scene and starting to make some waves, their first entry into a regional. Then we got Group B over here. We're looking at FaZe, Envy, Rogue, and All Mid. And this unfolded in a pretty typical manner, I would say. I think some people would probably predict Rogue above Envy with Envy's recent performances, but I'm not surprised to see Envy above Rogue. And All Mid, unfortunately, falling out 0-3. But this is a great, in all reality, it's a great performance for All Mid. This is their first time making it into a regional. So, good for them. Obviously, it's tough to not be able to take a series, but they played some teams competitively. And, hey, this is a great experience for them. FaZe going through in a perfect performance as well, 3-0. Or maybe not perfect. They dropped some games here, but 3-0 as far as matches. We got G2 taking their Group C in a 3-0, and this is perfect. They did not drop a single game. And again, Group C is a little bit different. I think a lot of people would predict Oxygen over Sonics and Charlotte Phoenix, but Sonics played well. And I think Oxygen, they had a rough go during the group stage. We see them lose a game 5 to Sonics. We see them go to game 5 with Charlotte Phoenix. And if they lose this, they would have been bounced in groups. So Oxygen barely making it through in that third seed. So that's how Group C unfolded. Then we got Group D with Complexity turning things around. Complexity, just like Envy, has had a really rough winter split after a pretty good performance in the fall split and even the fall. And they just have not been playing very well. But they've turned things around here, and they looked a lot better in this last regional. We had Space Station going through in a 2-1. The only team they lost to is Complexity. And then we have Torrent actually taking down XSET. So XSET ends up being eliminated, bounced in groups. And Torrent, great performance, making it through the group stage. Torrent has, obviously they're a pretty good, they've missed out on a couple regionals here and there. So this is exciting for them to, make it through that first stage of the event, whether it was Swiss stage or now we got groups. So it's exciting for them to make it to that kind of that next stage of the event. So that's kind of how groups unfolded. We only had one tiebreaker, which, I think, again, was unexpected, at least the teams that were in the tiebreaker. But yeah, that's how groups unfolded. So after we're over, that was Friday, obviously, we're looking at Saturday, and we have a race for 5th place. And obviously now in hindsight, we know how it unfolded. But at the time, we had Oxygen was actually in this 5th place spot. Space Station was in the 4th place spot. And then we had Version 1 right behind Oxygen. I think they were 50 points behind. We had Rogue, who was, 70, 80 points behind. And then we had Rebellion, who was tied with Rogue, I think. And then Complexity was actually beneath. And so we had, like I said, we had a battle for 5th. Who was going to be that 5th team to take the spot for Major? And like I said, that's what we're looking at as we walk into Saturday and the playoff section of this event. So let's look at that. We've got NRG in lowers facing Envy, first round. We've got Sonics and Torrent down here. We've got Randoms and Rogue, and then we got Space Station and Oxygen, round one of the lowers, the lower bracket, which is incredible because Space Station, again, they're that team in fourth place at the moment for the major, and you know they were in a comfortable spot, but we didn't know exactly. They weren't solidified, right? They didn't have it locked up, and they really needed to make it probably somewhere at least 2 or 3 rounds in to kind of solidify things. Well, they didn't do that. Oxygen ends up taking them down in game 5 in the round 1 of the lower bracket. And so Space Station is eliminated very early on in the tournament, which means their spot is not secure. That means that we could even see Oxygen and version 1 hop into that 4th and 5th spot and end up knocking Space Station out. And you know that's got to be stressful for those SSG players. They just barely missed out on the falling to Complexity in a tiebreaker match for that 5th spot. And now, again, in the 3rd regional, we're seeing them a little bit underperform. And now we've got a position that they're sitting in yet again where it's not locked up. They don't know if they're going to make it to the major. So you know that was stressful. And we saw some funny tweets from Reddles talking about how he's just going to sleep through the event. He don't want to watch it. So again, I know that's stressful, but long story short, they end up making it. Everything works out, so Space Station is okay. Envy does fall to NRG. It's unfortunate that Envy ends up running into NRG. Again, I think this is not what we expected, right? NRG as a 3rd seed in their group, and you're just not predicting that. We're not predicting NRG to barely squeak through the group stage. We've also got Sonics taking down Oxygen, which is a little bit of a flip-flop as well. And so now we've got this crazy matchup in lowers round 1 where in all reality, let's just be honest with it. Probably the 4 strongest teams, Envy, NRG, Oxygen, and Space Station, of these 8 are actually matched up against one another. We got Randoms and Rogue, and then Sonics and Torrent. And so, like I said, it's just kind of cutthroat the way things worked out as far as how groups shook out, and then obviously the seeding after groups was a little bit wonky, but that's just how it goes sometimes. So we got NRG taking down Envy, and round 1 we got Torrent taking down Sonics. Again, both Sonics and Torrent, in my opinion, should be proud of the performance that they put on here in this regional number 3. Torrent should be extra proud, especially making it a couple rounds into the bracket. We got Randoms taking down Rogue, and look, I'm a Rogue fan. You guys know that I've done some casts for the Rogue channel on day 1. And I got to do that last weekend. So I watched this Rogue and Random series, and I just got to be honest with you. Randoms absolutely dominated. You know, they absolutely dominated. They had control of like every aspect of the game. They were just, as simple as I can say it, it really just looked like Rogue was outclassed. It looked like the opposite. It looked like you had an established RLCS team that was consistent. They knew how they wanted to play. They were executing mechanically. And then it looked like you had a bubble team that was nervous and shaky, and they didn't have their rotations and chemistry down. But it was the inverse. We had Rogue was the team that was actually being dominated by Randoms, who is a relatively newly thrown together team. So I was extremely impressed with Randoms on their day 1 performance. We know that those 3 players individually are incredibly talented, but we didn't know if it was going to work out as a roster. So very, very impressive performance from Randoms. They take down Rogue 3-0 in the lower round 1. And then again, like I said, we got Space Station falling in game 5 to Oxygen. So that's how the first round shook out. And then we got NRG Torrent. And Torrent, yet again, like I said, they should be proud. They put up a really good fight against NRG. In fact, they probably could have won this series. I think if they execute a little bit better mechanically on both offense and defense, they were right there. It was neck and neck with NRG. And I will say this, NRG was definitely not playing their best. I think they slowly ramped up as the event went on, and we see them go from lowers round 1 literally all the way to the finals. So NRG doing NRG things, but we know sometimes NRG just doesn't bring their A game. Sometimes they don't bring their best stuff, and I think that was the case here. But props to Torrent, trying to capitalize on that, recognizing, hey, NRG's not doing their best thing. We're gonna give it our best, and they played really well. We had some highlight clips too from Torrent. I know Magic Bear had a sick, absolutely sick flip reset that he ends up dunking and really outplaying the entire NRG roster. So anyways, really impressive performance from Torrent in this event, in my opinion. They fall in game 5 to NRG. Again, very impressive. They should be proud. We got Oxygen and Randoms. Randoms, maybe they had a bunch of steam on Friday and they felt really good. And then on Saturday, after that night of rest, maybe they, weren't feeling as confident. But Oxygen, steamroll. Oxygen 3-0, not a problem. And they keep rolling. So then we got the lower quarterfinals. And what this is the losers of the upper semis. They drop down here and face the teams that have made it to the third round here from lower. So we got V1 versus Complexity, and then we got FaZe versus G2. Those are the 4 groups, number 1 seeds. And so as we know throughout this split, you've had a big advantage of you get an extra loss if you are that number 1 seed from the groups. So FaZe end up falling 4-1 to G2. And then V1, excuse me, in an incredible series, makes a beautiful comeback against Complexity. If I'm not mistaken, V1 was actually down 3-1 in the series. Yeah, 1, 2, 3 for Complexity, 1 win for V1. So a lot of, in my opinion, a very good sign, very promising for V1, especially because it is one of the most difficult things, in my opinion, about Rocket League esports is keeping your cool, staying positive whenever things are not going well, right? And V1 just came off of a really hot performance. They're losing to Complexity in a 3-1 series, or in a best of 7, they're losing 3-1. And Complexity has definitely not had their best stuff, so that's probably a little bit frustrating. Well, V1, they're not concerned with that. They don't get, they're not shook up or nervous or frustrated or whatever. They just keep rolling, keep doing their thing, and they turn it around and end up bringing back the series, and they take Complexity down in Game 7. Very, very impressive stuff from V1. This is the type of stuff that, this win from V1 is incredible, right? Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. But this is the type of stuff that I like to see along the way, because when everything is going well, everything is clicking, you're not making any mistakes, there's no mental adversity to overcome, of course you play well. Of course things go well, right? That's impressive because you're playing well, but it's just not, in my opinion, it doesn't really test you. This type of stuff, it tests you a little bit. It tests that version 1 team chemistry and just team environment, and they're just mental fortitude. So I was really excited to see this from V1 on their incredible performance here throughout this winter regional number 3. And then, so like I said, we got these 2 teams, Complexity and FaZe, falling to the lower quarterfinals. We got Complexity versus NRG, has been, trending upwards in this bracket here. They're boom, boom, boom. They're getting wins, whereas Complexity just came off of a really tough loss. So I'm not too surprised to see this. NRG 4-1 Complexity. And then we got FaZe taking down Oxygen 4. And I do think, I mentioned this once, I do think this series was a little bit closer than the scores indicate. But we got to give FaZe their props. We got to give them their credit. They took care of business and took care of an Oxygen team that a lot of other teams have been struggling to take care of, and Oxygen is definitely on the rise. So great stuff from FaZe here to make it onto the lower semifinals. And then they run into NRG, and we know that FaZe has struggled with NRG and G2. In fact, I don't think they've beaten them once, either of those teams, throughout this winter split. They've played them close, and they're very competitive with every team that they play in the top 3 or 4. But they've struggled to overcome that last hurdle of actually taking them down. So we see them right here, goes into Game 7, incredibly long, incredibly tense overtime in Game 7. A critical mistake at the end of the game ends up allowing NRG to capitalize, and they end up taking that series in Game 7. So, it's tough. It's tough for FaZe. The thing that I think, and we talked about this a lot on my stream throughout the past few weeks, I think they just got to, if they just keep believing in each other, keep communicating, and keep working, I am confident that this FaZe roster, it's incredibly talented. I'm confident that they're going to be everything that they think they can be. They just got to keep working. They got to keep rolling. So anyways, FaZe falls down to NRG in Game 7 in a lower semifinal. And then we got NRG running into G2. G2 ended up losing to V1 in a 4-2 fashion and falling to lowers. I definitely do not think that, similar to what I said about NRG down in this area of the bracket, I do not think this was G2's best stuff. They did not play poorly by any means, and I'm not meaning to take away from V1 or NRG for that matter. But again, I don't think that was G2's best stuff. I think they played a lot better in the previous regional. So G2 falls to V1 in a 4-2 fashion, and then G2 falls again in the lower bracket final to NRG in a 4-1 fashion. So NRG off to a rough start. They end up being put in lowers in the lower. And they just freaking steam. They just march right through this thing. 3-1 Envy, 3-2 Torrent, 4-1 Complexity, 4-3 FaZe, 4-1 G2. And this is just NRG doing NRG things. This is just what they do. They're very consistent. Obviously, they have some weak performances at times, but who doesn't, right? You're not going to play perfect. The thing, in my opinion, that sets NRG apart from others is when we have those poor performances, we are still able to scrape and claw wins, right? This is not a pretty win. Like I said, this was not their best stuff, and Torrent played well, but they're still able to just make it happen. So NRG deserves the credit. They deserve the praise, and they're just consistently there. They were in the finals of every single regional throughout the winter, and they got a win as well. So, again, NRG, that's just what they do. Top of NA, great team, very consistent. and we'll see how they perform at the major. But we got the grand final. Version 1 takes down NRG handily. I think V1 was just rolling. I think they were in a great mood. I think they had a lot of things going their way, especially once they went ahead and when they got up here, it was pretty much they were going to have to be bounced here, and then Oxygen was going to have to make it like one round further for V1 to be knocked out. So once they topped their group, V1 was in a really great headspace, and they felt really good about their chances to make the major. And then once they made it to the upper bracket final, I think at that point, V1 is feeling really confident, especially once Oxygen gets eliminated, because now V1 is secured, and you're just riding that high. You know what I mean? You're just riding that high. You feel really confident. You feel really excited, and they continue to roll and just perform really, really, really well. So I'm excited for that V1 team. I think V1, I think G2, I think FaZe are rosters that obviously just made a change, and I think they are potentially upgrades, and I think very likely will be upgrades. But we had, it took some time, right? G2 in the first regional of the winter didn't look their best. They were a little bit shaky, but they turned around. They ended up taking down regional number 2. They ended up winning. V1, again, they started off okay, and then in regional number 2, they ended up getting eliminated really early in the event, and then they turned things around here in the regional number 3, and they ended up winning the entire thing. So we saw 2 of those 3 teams that I named, and FaZe is the other one. We saw 2 of those 3 teams that I named that made roster changes, and people were kind of like on the fence about it. We don't know. We think it's going to be an upgrade, but we got to see it. 2 of those 3 teams ended up getting regional wins, and FaZe had very consistent results in top 4. Another roster that I think is important as far as roster changes is Oxygen. Oxygen, they added Gimmick to the roster, and Oxygen missed out on 2 regionals in the fall. All right? Oxygen missed out on 2 regionals in the fall. They weren't even in these events. And now in the winter, they have gone 3 events, 3 top 6. That is very promising, and in my opinion, indicates a very bright future for that roster. So we're going to talk a little bit about the NA landscape at the moment, and something that I mentioned at the beginning of the split when we saw some of this shakeup and some of this roster change and addition of new players. It's just an influx of talent. One to mention is Beast Mode. I know he's not a new player, but he was not present in the fall split. He ended up taking a break. He got plugged in at V1, right? We got Daniel. He was too young to play. Now he is 15. He is eligible to play. He gets plugged in with Space Station. Because of the Beast Mode plug-in on V1, Gimmick has now been released into free agency, and he gets plugged in for Oxygen, right? We got Rogue picking up Aqua. Aqua is very similar to Daniel, too young to play. He gets, he becomes 15. He gets plugged in at Rogue. We got Rebellion, who's having to replace Beast Mode. They pick up another young talent in Parth. I think he's 16, but Parth is a very mechanical young player. He made it in a few regionals last RLCS season. And so, again, Rebellion gets Parth plugged in, and, they have shown promise, in my opinion, throughout this winter split. So, obviously NRG didn't make a change, but we got 2 through like 9 or 10, and we saw roster changes, roster change G2, roster change FaZe, roster change V1, boom, boom. No complexity roster change, boom, boom, boom. So we got lots of shakeup, lots of mix-up, but I think it actually ended up strengthening the region kind of 1 through 9, whereas in the fall split, it felt pretty strong 1 through 6, maybe 1 through 7 with XZ or Ghost sometimes looking pretty good. But after that, it seemed like a pretty sharp drop-off. And now it seems like we've extended that competitive level of play just a little bit further. 1 or 2, maybe 3 new teams that are kind of punching up. We see, these are our top 5, and they perform really, really well every event, right? Or for the most part. We had V1 and Space Station kind of falling out early in one event each. But this is our expected top teams, right? 1 through 5 expected top teams. But now we've got Oxygen making some waves. Complexity fell off, but now they are, at least in Regional 3, they looked a lot stronger. We got Rogue making some waves. We got Rebellion making some waves. Envy, same as Complexity, fell off, making a little bit of noise here in Regional number 3. And Sonics and XZ and Torrent and Phoenix, and look, let's say Ghosts and Randoms too, those teams are not weak. They're just not performing well. We've seen Torrent show glimpses of greatness. We've seen this Randoms team out absolutely nowhere. They've shown a lot of promise. Had a much worse winter split, but again, I think they are just not performing at the moment. It may be some internal issues. I don't know. Sonics has a ton of potential. XZ has a ton of potential. So we're seeing a slow upgrade for the kind of mid-tier RLCS teams in North America. So that's a good thing. That was something that I was excited about at the beginning of this winter split, because I want to see some parity. I want to see some of these teams that are not that solidified top 4, top 5 area. I want to see them punching up, right? I want to see When we see NRG fall to randoms, that's exciting. When we see Oxygen fall to Sonics, that's exciting. I want to see some more of these teams end up taking down these top level guys. So that's something that I got really excited about, and I love to see that. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about is the major and what to expect. Now, we're not going to do any predictions, right? We're not going to do that because we don't even know what all EU teams are going to be in the major. But aside from that, I just want to talk a little bit about what we think could happen and what could unfold and what regions do we think are going to perform well. And so we're going to flash back a little bit to the fall major. And we've had this whole just idea of like NA and EU are really like the only regions that have a chance at winning international events. And that may have been the truth, or that may have been the case for the past. But I think we are entering an era of Rocket League where that's not the case. I think we have some very strong South American teams. We have some very strong MENA teams. We have APAC teams, which I think are going to very quickly improve and catch up to the rest of the pack. You have to admit they are a little bit behind, and reasonably so. They haven't really had any competition at the highest level for a long time, and now obviously being added into the RLCS format is going to help benefit that region tremendously. We also got OCE. Both OCE teams that represented their region in the fall major made it to the last round of the Swiss stage. So again, we've got a little bit of competition from regions outside of NA and EU. And I think that's really exciting for just the entire scene, because when these regions or these teams or even these players feel confident that no one else is going to threaten them, they can kind of relax, right? Like they may not be on the grind as much as they could be because, well, hey, nobody's really threatening my spot, right? So I am excited to see some of these teams. Like we saw SRG perform so well in the fall major. They end up making top 8. They take down G2 and a couple other strong teams while they're there. And so I'm just really, really excited to see or see these other regions continue to grow and continue to threaten the two established regions of North America and Europe. And, you know, we have to paint this picture correctly. North America and Europe, the first regions established. So it makes sense that they are a little bit ahead of the pack. They're a little bit stronger. It makes sense, right? They were established from season 1, and then we added OCE a little bit later on. We added SAM a little bit later on, and now we've added MENA and APAC as well as SSA for at least the Wild Card Championship and World Championship. So Rocket League Championship Series is a genuine, real world championship. We have players from all over the globe that are competing at the highest level. And again, when we open that door and we allow these players from everywhere to chase their dream, we saw the interview with Realize, one of the APAC players that has been playing competitively within his region forever. He's been around the scene from the very beginning. And we saw how emotional he got in that interview at the Fall Major, because he said there's always that nagging feeling of like, is there ever going to be something for me to pursue? I'm pouring all this time and effort in, and I'm not eligible to compete on the world stage. You know, I see all these other regions. I see these players chasing their dreams and they're working so hard, but they get something out of it. And he just outlined the fact that he had even debated stepping away from the game. And so, again, I just think it's so important. I think it's great for all these players to provide them opportunities, but I also think it's great for growth of the esport, even within the regions that have been eligible. Because like I said earlier, when you have other folks that are gunning for your spot and they're trying to take you down, that's going to motivate you to try a little bit harder, work a little bit harder, grind more so than maybe you would if people were not coming for your spot. So I'm excited for that. I'm very excited for this LAN in Los Angeles. If you have not heard yet, there is going to be a crowd. Tickets are already sold out. It's going to be in the YouTube Theater. Like I said, Los Angeles. I mean, I'm going to be there. I am unbelievably excited to be there. I can't wait to watch these teams and see who performs well. You know, in all honesty, I would love to see a team from one of the regions other than North America and EU win the event. And I do think it's maybe a long shot at the moment, but I think, hey, SRG, I think they could do it. They're adding Khaled to the equation now. He ended up missing in the fall major, had some school issues, some conflicts, but with him jumping back on this roster and that team kind of having their regular stuff, we may see them perform really well at this at this winter major. So, you know, all I got to say is I'm excited. I don't have any predictions just yet. Maybe we'll do some predictions once we see what EU teams are going to be competing and everything is solidified. Maybe we see some groups and stuff like that. But I am indescribably excited to watch these teams compete in person, international competition. I mean, what more could you ask for? That's an RLCS fan dream. So that's going to conclude today's show. Just a quick recap of the NRG, the NA Regional number 3, the Mobile One Winter Mountain Classic for the winter split. And like I said, it determined the 5 teams that are going to make it to the major for the North American region. I'm excited to see that. I will say that I do think that's probably the best 5 teams to represent North America. And we're going to see how well they perform against some of the strong talent throughout the rest of the world. With that being said, we'll catch you guys next time. I hope you enjoyed it. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Peace.